I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at UNISA, and I'll be your program director for today's public lecture. Thank you for taking time to attend this event. Just a few house rules. For those joining us virtually, could I kindly request that you keep your cameras off and your mics muted? At the end of our lecture and the respondent, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions where you will be able to engage with the presenter as well as the respondent. So today, colleagues, we have the privilege this morning of having Professor Lesiba Baloyi and our respondent for today's public lecture, Professor Zetu Kakata. But before introducing Professor Baloyi, I would like to invite the Deputy Dean of the College of Human Sciences at UNISA, Professor Mashao, just to do a welcome address for us.
Program Director, Professor Adonis, the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences, Professor Zedzet Nkosi in absentia, the Director of the School of Social Sciences, Professor Azwi Mabandum Zusi, Acting Chair of the Department of Psychology, Dr. Nekawambe, our esteemed guest, Professor Lesiba Baloyi, Professor Zetu Kakata, our respondent to the public lecture by Professor Baloyi, our esteemed scholars from the Department of Psychology, and your guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Machironi. Aushin. Sanmona. Huyemore. Good morning. Mine is a very simple but important task to welcome you to this very important and timely conversation. The theme of this public lecture reminds us not only about the imperative to decolonize and Africanize our curriculum, a discourse that was pushed on our agenda by the Four-List movement, but also reminds us of the demise and marginalization of humanities in public and private universities. We live and do scholarship in the global context defined by uncertainties and woundedness, a context of what I call death and dying. Humanities are not just under threat because of your global pandemics, global wars. We are also faced with challenges around AI threatening to, through robotics, take over our space and roll under the earth. You will know that AI at this point in time is even coming up with tools like your chat GPT that threaten to even replace us in terms of how we do research and also how we teach. So indeed, humanities is under serious threat from all angles. This also includes pressure around funding of humanities and its continued marginalization as subversive or irrelevant field. It also includes issues around access, representativity, and even the content of what we teach in African universities like ours. We are not only a wounded generation struggling to breathe through the wounds from the systemic and epistemic violence that we continue to suffer as proposed by Ndlovu Gacheni when identifying issues among others, the theft of his or her story, epistemicides, linguicides, and culturecides as representation of these social injustices and an attack on humanities. We are a generation that seems to be on a back foot, having to justify even our existence in this space. But of course, our mission is about re-centering African epistemologies over and against Eurocentrism and Western bias when coming to the body knowledge and the praxis thereof. Our efforts to engage in epistemic disobedience, as suggested by Walter McNaull, we have to be intentional in how we think, rethink, resist, unthink, and unlearn the West as we claim our stake on earth by revolutionizing our academic space. This should include efforts to dismantle colonial and post-colonial power metrics, recognize and valuing of African traditions, languages, and worldviews as legitimate and important components of our educational system, including research and teaching of psychological science. We should therefore be talking issues around cultural relevance, which I think Professor Baloyi will assist us to reimagine that conversation this morning. And of course, talk more about how do we then use the lived experiences of our people as dominant factors in defining our curriculum and how we practice even psychology moving forward. Failure to live up to this mission will simply imply that we would have failed in our social justice mandate as humanity. But at the same time, it also constitutes some form of betrayal to humanity as we continue to be accomplices to epistemic violence and abuse against black bodies and black body knowledge systems. Having said this, I would like to use this opportunity to say I wish you a very fruitful engagement this morning. Professor Baloyi, welcome to the University of the land, one that is committed to shaping the futures of humanity in the service of humanity and in the service of preserving humanities. Welcome to the College of Human Sciences, a home of more than 50,000 students, and welcome to the Department of Psychology. Wotanganeziwa, amkela. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mashao. I think it's a question of welcome back. So, colleagues, today we have the pleasure of, hearing from Professor Lasiba Baloy, who's an esteemed scholar and whose work has significantly contributed to the discourse on decoloniality and Africanization within the humanities and social sciences and within psychology in particular. So just before Professor Baloy takes the podium, I would just like to give a brief background. Professor Baloy currently holds a joint appointment as Head of Department and Chief Clinical Psychologist at the Department of Clinical Psychology at the George Muckleneuk Academic Hospital and Safako Makgato Health Sciences University in Pretoria. Professor Baloy has more than 27 years experience in teaching and supervising undergraduate and postgraduate students. Previously, he was a senior lecturer and coordinator of the MA clinical program at UNISA, and that was from 2000 to 2003. So it's welcome back, Professor Baloy. Professor Baloy is past president of the Forum of African Psychology and a member of the International Task Force of the Association of Black Psychologists in the US. His research interests include African epistemology and psychology, indigenous research methodologies, decolonizing and Africanizing and redesigning psychology curriculum, postmodern thinking, Ubuntu philosophy, racism and racial power relations, land and the psychological impact of land dispossession on indigenous people, and indigenous knowledge systems in general. Professor Baloy has published articles, conference proceedings, and book chapters, and he has presented papers and keynote addresses at national and international conferences. The topic of Professor Baloy's lecture, an argument for cultural parity, representativity in the humanities and social sciences curriculum in South Africa, lessons from the MSc Clinical Psychology Training Program, is both timely and crucial, as Professor Mashao said. In recent years, the call for decolonizing academic curricula has gained significant momentum, challenging us to rethink and restructure our educational systems to better reflect and serve our diverse society. Professor Baloy's lecture will draw on his extensive experience with the MSc Clinical Psychology Training Program to illustrate how these principles can be effectively implemented in higher education. And as we delve into today's lecture, I would like to encourage you all to engage thoughtfully with the ideas presented and to consider the broader implications of decoloniality and Africanization in our educational systems. This is an opportunity to reflect on how we can contribute to a more inclusive and representative academic landscape. So, colleagues, please join me in welcoming Professor Baloy. Thanks. Sorry, Prof. Colleagues, can I just request that you mute your phones? And then for those joining us online, just a reminder, please mute your mics. At the end of Professor Baloy's presentation and Professor Kakata's response, we'll have questions and answers. For those joining us online, you can just type your questions and then we'll accommodate it in that way.
Where's Ntate Pilane now? I told you I'm a dinosaur. You must just show me where to press.
Not worry. I know you'll just use the arrows.
This
for the
one?
next, yeah, for the next slide. Just maybe we could close this.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. No, you just use the arrows.
But make it big because I can't see. Are you able to make it big screen?
It's in presentation mode, so I'm not sure.
Is it in presentation mode?
Yeah,
It's easier when you made it bigger.
it was. Let's just slide.
I don't want this small thing. I don't need.
No, presentation mode. Maybe we can close this.
Close that one.
No, I don't know about this one, fella.
I don't need that.
Yeah, so this is what people are going to see only.
Yeah.
And then Yenanya for next.
No, I want to. I'm not
No,
like
remove it. I will work with this.
Oh, okay. No, there's no way. Programming.
Yeah, it's
Oh, it's programmed that way.
So
Okay.
you just move from the slide next to using these arrows.
This is forward.
You can just check here.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. And let me take this opportunity to thank the leadership of the university and the organizers for asking me to come and share with you a bit of what I've done and a bit of what I still intend to do. So it is really an honor for me to be requested to present this public lecture. Deputy Dean, I spent how many years here? Almost 14 years here. And so it was beautiful to be back here this morning. And so let me, without any waste of time, get into the business of the day. But I just want to point out two things. First of all, I'm sure colleagues, you have heard the Dean has already quoted a lot of people that have written about African epistemology and all the terminology that is used. So I'm not going to bore you with all this intellectual material. We all have read about this. My interest is we have had enough of all intellectualization. How do we take that which these esteemed scholars have written about and put it into practice? That's my interest now. Otherwise, we complain forever, we never do anything, and we intellectualize forever. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I would like to just share with you a story, because I come from this place, so I have a bit of a story to tell you, and you will later on link it with the presentation. I joined UNISA in 2000, and around 2003, because of the questions I had. At that time I was considering doing my PhD, and so I had a lot of questions, especially after going through at least 500 definitions of psychology and psychotherapy. And I thought this information was not sufficient, and I pushed until I stopped at 1,200 definitions of psychology and psychotherapy. And what I discovered was that there was nothing about us. Psychology is not defined for us, it's not defined by us. And so I embarked on a journey to work on something that will reflect us, because properly construed, science must be able to reflect different voices if it's to be objective, as claimed, or universal. So I did that, and I think 2005 I put together a course obviously, it was developmental, and by 2010, it was a fully established course in the Master's MA Clinical Psychology course. And we were evaluated by the Health Professions Council, which really congratulated us on this. And when I left in 2013, just to cut the long story short, the course was in place. A colleague of mine said, you know, because you're leaving, maybe we must give you a contract so that you at least for the coming 3 years, you come and carry on, and whoever is going to continue teaching African epistemology. And then the contract was signed. I don't know where the people that signed contracts sit. And in 2014, because I left in 2013, in 2014 I came back and presented to the students, carried on. The contract was for 3 years. And in 2016 and 17, I was informed that the contract is cancelled. And I'm sure UNISA is the second richest university. It could not have been because of money. But what was much more curious, was that I think I'm sure actually, the coordinator of the MA Clinical Psychology at the time was a black person. And before I knew it, in 2016, during my contract, I was told that now there's a white, inexperienced man that was teaching African epistemology. So that tells the story. So the journey that we have embarked on of teaching African epistemology, it's a difficult one. And above all, as you would see in my presentation, it is not only the colonizer that is resisting us reclaiming, I've seen outside there, reclaiming Africa's intellectual futures. It is not only the colonizer. So the colonizer has planted people here who resist and question our very being. So I just wanted to tell you the story of what happened, just to make sure that there's no African epistemology here. So let me just briefly point out the scope of my presentation. I want to just briefly to set the context by looking into the voyages of discovery and the impact on African life, the right of conquest and hegemony on educational curriculum, and how African ways of being, doing, and knowing were excluded through this process, the relationship between humanities, social sciences, and psychology. Of course, psychology is housed in one or the other. Epistemological and ethical basis for an authentic. In one of the papers, I've written about Zasemoya. In the other papers, I've written Swamoya, Tatana, Samsegilemus. So Swamoya. And at this point, I just want to indicate that I use the word psychology under protest. So during this presentation, just know that when I say psychology, I don't necessarily agree that it means what we understand by Swamoya. Just keep that in mind. I also want to challenge share the challenges that we experience in the implementation of Pan-African education and curriculum. And at this stage, I'm sure I'm not going to be aligned with the Deputy Dean and the Deans, but we will see how it goes. And then, lastly, I want to share with you what we have done to give practical effect to this claim, reclaiming the African intellectual futures. So here are the few questions that I would like us to ponder on. Is it possible to achieve cultural, epistemological, and linguistic parity and representativity using the conqueror's epistemological paradigm? Is it possible to reclaim using the conqueror's epistemological paradigm? This is the question that we even pose to those that have put that very nice portrait that we see when we drive past UNISA. Is it possible? Why is it that despite universities in general, humanities and social sciences in particular, in conqueror South Africa being led by blacks, the philosophies, theories, and research methodologies still reflect the dominance of the conqueror's epistemological paradigm? Metasteba Tatana, Deputy Dean Koresh, Kaspedi Bargidna Kacharoeshwa. Does it mean they've just planted us here, put horns on our heads, knowing that we don't know how to use the power? Is that what it means? Because in South Africa, there are very few universities where you have DVCs, deans, that are not necessarily wide. So we're in charge, but what are we doing that shows that we're in charge? Are we just there for the packs and all that comes with it? So why is it that despite the colonizers leaving higher education, no pan-epistemic orientation in education curriculum is reflected? Why? Is it ethical for humanities and social sciences such as psychology to train mental health care practitioners and psychology in this particular in foreign epistemology and unleash them on innocent and unsuspecting indigenous communities? Because this is what we are doing. So it's an ethical question. And therefore, we thought we must be careful not to graduate people that will by default continue to perpetuate the colonial and neoliberal thinking policies. So we actually need to decolonize, we need to Africanize, whichever way we go with, but something has to happen. So I'm sure you would remember that people such as Bartholomew Dias, and then way long before Jan van Riebeeck descended on our shore and discovered us, that there were other people that were on their way to the east and discovered us. And you'd remember what happened in the Cape of Good Hope. And that picture represents what happened. And so, these voyages of discovery marked an early epistemological capture, and as Deputy Dean demonstrated, in some instances through violent means. Kings were imprisoned, there were deceptions, there were land grabs. If you think there are land grabs now, go back to history and see how people grabbed our land and invaded our culture. So historically, Western culture and ideas were imposed on indigenous people, and this permeated the African life. And from then onwards, we have been put on a survivalist mode. And many African communities are just surviving because the means of production, including the means of producing our own knowledge system, have been captured. So this has had an impact on cultural and social economic activities. Conditions of indigenous people changed, including their education. So this is where we are. We're captured, and our curriculum was changed to reflect other realities other than ours. So the conception of what it means to be human, which we treasured so much, is now based on a foreign epistemology. And in particular, it's expressed through the educational curriculum. So our identity is not reflected in the education curriculum. So these colonial realities that were imposed on us changed our existential realities. Since then, we've just been surviving, and very critical questions had to be raised. And I just want to point out that fields such as humanities in which philosophy is housed and religion ask critical questions about issues of death. I'm sure you know many of the people suffered from conditions that were imposed by the colonial system, ethics, questions of ethics, justice, and democracy. The earlier writers asked about this. And so the method in humanities, as we would know now, were speculative, logical argument, and argumentation, formulations, and ideas were arrived at. So in the interest of time, I thought I must just indicate almost the method that is used in humanities, and then move on social sciences, where psychology in some instances or in the main is housed, and the method that is used there. And we would know that, you know, psychology in some instances, especially in the earlier years, used laboratory observations, experimentations, verifications, and falsification. The principle of empiricism became applicable. So objective knowledge, scientific study of the mind that was arrived at, and so this is the method in the social sciences. Of course, there are many other methods. This is just an example to demonstrate how in the beginning, because psychology, how did psychology end up in the social sciences? Because properly construed, the West says that psychology is the study of the mind, but we also know, and we will see when you read the works of nobles, that actually psychology is the study of the soul. I mean, and I'm interested whoever studied the soul, scientifically for that matter. So etymologically, psychology is a scientific study of the mind. And I've done extensive work on the psyche, the soul, and the spirit. So indeed, if psychology is the study of the mind, it doesn't surprise us that Descartes came up with this famous dictum, I think, therefore I am. So, according to Descartes, the I became the subject of study or investigation. I think, therefore I am. So, according to Descartes, existence is primarily defined according to this I identity, which in my view and many other views, and Prof. Kakata would probably agree with this, inaugurated the epistemology of individualism. I. So, Descartes promoted the theory of mind and body, and the stage was set for modern science of psychology, the dualism, psychology of dualism. Descartes sought to construct universal science, and I'm not going to waste time arguing about universality, because we refute the idea that knowledge can be necessarily universal, but we argue that it's contextual. First of all, as Okere argued, first of all, authentic knowledge is local. So that the stage was set for universal psychology, and that's why even our knowledge systems were universalized. So, in my view, and of course I vehemently question this universal claim to science, because whose science are we talking about, and so on and so forth. So you remember when we were taught basic psychology, people such as, I just picked one, Wilhelm Wundt, I think is a German psychologist, who studied a whole lot of processes, psychological processes under the laboratory conditions. As we said, psychology also wants to verify and falsify. So, and according to Wundt, psychology was the science of consciousness, or conscious experience. So you had to be trained as an observer, and you can accurately describe thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And so what is interesting about this era is that when you look into books that are purport to be talking about psychology, look at that one, The Pioneers of Psychology. If you look into that book, I went through the book, all white men with Western psychological orientation. But it is claimed that it's the pioneers of psychology. So the pioneers of psychology exclude us. We're not the pioneers of psychology at all. And even if people such as Mangani could have said, well, I've written something, it would not have counted. So the above philosophy and psychology are not consistent with our African conception of being, but continue to dominate humanities and social sciences, and psychology in particular. So we as Africans, who are indeed about spirituality, Tsasemoya, Somoya in Changane, ours is the study or the understanding of the spirit. It is for this reason that, especially the PhD student, when we expose them to literature, the masters, we start with the masters, and we prescribe books such as the books we have prescribed yours, Prof, by the way, Prof Kakata. We prescribe books such as Linda Smith, Steve Biko is very deep in psychology and politics. Manganyi's work features very centrally Okere, Ramose, Noem, Kize, Fanon, Sodi, Grills, Nobles, Myers, and so on and so forth. And there are many, 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 many. So I challenged one of my PhD students to say, let's see if you can produce a PhD without quoting or using the conquerors' literature. Let's see. And of course, that is a project in the making. So it is important to have this historical background so that when we get to where we are, it helps us to think critically about even the fields, humanities, social sciences, and psychology in particular. So Descartes argued that, I think, therefore I am, but I subscribe to Bujo, may his soul rest in peace because he passed on a few months ago. I am related, therefore we are. I am related, therefore we are. Juxtapose this with I think, therefore I am. So our being is conceived in relational and spiritual terms that promote collaboration, harmony, interdependence, and peaceful coexistence. And therein lies the question of ethics, because there's also the question of justice. So this is the philosophy that understands being and identity in the context of others, which we refer to as the we epistemology. And anything that diffuses us as a people is not consistent with our epistemology. So against this background, humanities and social sciences in general, and education and psychology curriculum in particular in our local context, should understand and reflect the relational, communal, spiritual African realities. That's my argument that I posit. So, let us look at what African epistemology is all about and the method briefly, because of the time issue. So, Noy defines epistemology as the methods and sources by which useful knowledge is produced. And this should reflect our existential realities. And in our case, we need to have to go down into psychology that looks into, for example, the cases of poverty, crime, gender-based violence, unemployment, discrimination, issues such as personality. How do Africans understand personality? You'll agree with me that personality, according to all the theories that we've been exposed to, would say personality is the attributes of an individual and so on and so forth. But I can tell you, in my culture, when we want to understand what an individual is, there's a very critical question that is asked. As the professor was standing here, I was asking, so your personality is never seen in isolation as an attribute. Yeah. It's related to your family, your clan, your community. And how does this coexist with the current understanding of personality that is individualistic in nature? And these are the questions that we have to really ask ourselves. So here's what is interesting to me. And I'll go back to what happened many years when we were here with Professor Stanley Lifshitz to make a point about that African epistemology method, that we once invited the traditional healers to come and talk to our students because they claimed that their job was to heal. So we said, no, have an interaction with other healers. And Stan Lifshitz went and collected the traditional healers, and in the morning they were entering here, and the security was brought in to stop them. Can you see? But and at the time we had here Prof just said it in humanity. There was a motto there that Prof spoke to. Yes, but we had a tough time to bring them in. Similarly, at a conference in Kempton Park, I went and collected the traditional healers to ban Pepu and to bless our presentation because it's African Epistemology Colloquium. And therefore we had to do it the African way. And so the traditional healers came into this big hall and they started banning Pepu, and the securities were on us. These people must leave. And that tells you where we are in terms of knowledge coexistence and knowledge production, that which reflects us does not belong to the university. Yeah. So what is a university? We have to even ask the question, what is a university if it does not reflect the realities and the multiple voices that are there? And therefore, if you look at the method, for example, of performing rituals, storytelling, folklore, art, songs, sculpting, and so on, we don't have that in our psychology as methods of healing. We don't use these methods, and we are never taught these methods of healing. And therefore, I will leave that long quote of Prof. Ramuse that tells us about what pan-epistemic education orientation or curriculum is all about. And I'll just point out the significance or the centrality of language when we talk about knowledge production. That language is very, very important. It is for this reason that we considering, like the University of KwaZulu-Natal, when you do psychology, you have to understand Zulu, you know, because you are going to be working with, in the main, the Zulu clients, or isiZulu speaking clients. So the professor, the deputy dean, when he spoke about the culture side, linguistic side, episteme side, and therefore, in our view, language and culture are inseparable. People connect to the other, the world, through language. So language is the embodiment of culture and identity, and therefore, it is to be central in our decolonial project. And people such as Prof. Kakata have demonstrated that by writing in isiXhosa and articulating the ideas or indicating that isiXhosa is a language of science, to dispel the myth that our languages are not science languages. Through language, we reveal our cultural identity, thoughts, and emotions. So, because of this power, the colonial education relegated our languages and obliterated our culture and identities. And as Prof. Ndlovu in one of the conferences accurately captured this, said, language is about well-being, to be at peace. Colonial languages alienated people from self and the environment. So language is also inextricably linked to the environment. Yeah. There's a very, very close relationship between language and environment. And in the context of where I am, because I'm located in health and education, to adopt a foreign language when engaging patients and students is to deny them their right to learning. And it is for this reason that all our students, through that Nelson Mandela Fidel Castro project, when our students go to Cuba to be doctors, the first year they must spend doing they have to learn the Cuban language, I think it's Spanish. So they have to learn that for the whole year. Why is it the case that when people come to our shows, they can just not even know our language, but work with us? These are very serious questions. Why is it the case? Last week, 2 weeks back, I was presenting a paper in Athens, in Greece, and the professor that opened the session said, every Greek child must learn about Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. It is the Greek way. And he said in their time they used to beat them because you have to know and understand the contribution of the Greeks to humanity. It is compulsory. UNISA used to be very, very, very strong in languages when I grew up. And today, I'm not so sure if any language is compulsory here, but that's a story for another day. So here's where I think I'm going to not agree with the management. The challenges in the construction of pan-epistemic curriculum design is at different levels. In my view, the first level is at teacher-lecturer level. The lecturers, our lecturers, without being critical about what we're teaching, we impose the concurrent epistemologies, theories, and methodologies on our students. And this I've seen in how the students construct their protocols. Always, whether they look into the African processes and phenomena, when they come to the research methodology, it's the black people do not have research methodologies, despite the books that people such as Linda Smith, Decolonizing Methodologies, and Minolo, the books that they've written, but the students would, because the African methodology is not perceived as scientific, so they'll move, and this creates a disjuncture. So the other level where we have problems, and I happen to sit in a school board, a school ethics level, because the school ethics level is the one that is going to look at your protocol, and the schools tend to dismiss indigenous methodologies as scientific. But moreover, we do not have indigenous experts representing us in the schools because they are perceived not to be scientific. But let me tell you, if you go to the community with your protocol and you want to do research, it will be exposed to the traditional council. And that's another level of verification. They want to know if you're just there to collect data and go, or if it's going to benefit the community. The other level is the university ethics level, where the Western conception of science supersedes everything. And I want to borrow the words of someone that said, something to the effect that evidence of knowledge is not evidence of presence or evidence of existence. In other words, we are always dismissed because we'll be told that, this is not scientific and so on. It's not written and so on. But we have dispelled that myth long ago now, because we know there are different sources of knowledge production, and oral tradition is one of those. And I'm not saying it's not important to document what we are doing. I'm just pointing out that these kind of structures in universities tend to connive with the colonizer unintentionally by dismissing our very existence. So this is what we are faced with. Senate level, the professors here go to Senate level, and I do not have a view that Senate dedicate focus to curriculum transformation. Senate has become a political arena. It has become the second parliament instead of focusing on the business of academia and knowledge production. So we do not have that focus there at that level. Maybe I'm wrong here, it's done differently. The professors that sit in Senate really talk about curriculum transformation. I still have to look at the curriculum at UNISA and see if African epistemology is there. The Health Professions Council, which we register with, you'll find that all Western modules such as assessment, psychodynamic, and all the others are compulsory. But African epistemology is not compulsory. But the people that are produced are going to be working with African communities. But it's not compulsory, it's just a by the way kind of thing. So these are the challenges that face us. So I want to share with you, which is my duty today, what we have done, because we have accumulated literature and a lot about African epistemology. And so we thought, how are we going to make sure that we train our students in this? And what we did was first to collaborate with the other universities and other scholars. And what we did was to collaborate with the University of KwaZulu-Natal and University of Limpopo. First of all, you had to take people that think like you to build this knowledge base. So what we did in putting together, I built on what I left here at UNISA, and I took it to Sefakumaka Health Sciences Universities. And so we designed a course. We have a 2-year program course. And that's the code, but it's a master's course. We have a PhD student that is looking into the undergraduate so that it can be based on actual evidence. So what we have done, we have taken retired professors. One of them we took here, Prof. Ramose, you can see there. Because he's an authority, we thought, okay, now that the other places do not want him, we must use him. we must excavate this knowledge from this man. So he has been with us now for, I think, 6 years, teaching and helping us to develop this. The other thing was to go to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and they also offloaded Prof. Noy, and we grabbed him. We said, no, we need you. You must come and help us design this course. So the course that you see there, which is the theory model, MLCB, is in the first year with 30 credits. So what we do, we expose the students to what we call African experience, which is taught by Prof. Ramose, significance of history and context, just like I've done. Introduction to African philosophy and epistemology, and the indigenous research methodologies, which I teach, African indigenous psychology theories, their relevance and applicability in South Africa, which I teach, and Afrocentric theory of embodied gates of stress. So we look at stress from how we understand it, and that is taught by Prof. Noy. A synoptic and multidimensional theory of the modern African self. The question of self is so important, and self in relation to community, self in relation to the environment, and so on and so forth. So it's a huge curriculum. I just took the snippet so that I can share with colleagues what we're busy doing. So the significance of understanding cultural knowledge, spirituality, experience, practice, and rituals in therapy. Our students are exposed to this so that when they go into hospital, because we are adjacent to the hospital, they can be able to apply this because they're going to find African patients in hospital with different belief systems. As a matter of fact, many of these African patients believe, in fact, we did that in the past, that I said to students, go into the hospital. Different, I don't want the same cases. There were 12, and I said, interview all these patients, come back and tell me what their understanding of the cause of their illness is. Whether it's cancer, whether it's a gunshot, whether it's whatever. The patient said to them, I think it has got something to do with me neglecting my family at home, back in Limpopo or back in KwaZulu-Natal or in Kunu. You know, I think the ancestors are unhappy with me doing this, that's why I got shot. Can you see? And this is the understanding of why, and we need students to understand this. And not to say to people when they start talking about their culture, no, you are hallucinating. You know, but to understand this, and that's why we designed this course in this way. You know, the African conception of ethics I co-teach with Prof. Ramose. Fundamental principles and concepts in African psychology, Prof. Noy, from mind to relationships. You remember Descartes and Bujo, from mind to relationships, a 5-stage theory of community participation in grief work. This is what we teach our students. African communal, because we're communal in nature, African communal indigenous healing therapies and modalities. This I teach. And then we ask Prof. Ramose at the end to put it all together with the African experience. So there's many more. I just took a few to, who's the timekeeper will tell me when it's just 5 minutes left?
No, you can carry on.
Oh, I can carry on. Thank you very much. The chair says I must carry on. So at a theoretical level, this is, amongst the many things that we teach, this is what we expose our students to. So, in order to accommodate this, and I'll share with you shortly, you will see what we have done so that we do not bypass all the processes I was talking about. The school board, I'll demonstrate what we have done. So, then we say we have taught you theory. So you must go now and practice. But because it's the second year, and the second year has got a lot of practicum that they focus on. We have the clinic in the university that they see patients in, and then we have different clinics, medical block, psychiatry block, community block, and the outpatient clinic. So we say to students, let us talk about experience now and experiential work. So Prof. Ramose again take them through the African experience, and this is at the practical level, the African definition and conception of illness and wellness. What does it mean to be well for an African? So that they can understand when the patients speak about relational connectedness and disconnection and so on and so forth. Alternative conceptual frameworks, we do that. Rituals of cleansing and repossession. An African approach to treatment of spiritual and moral injury. Prof. Noy teaches that. The concept of cause in the African thought. I'm sure we know Sogolo's work on the concept of cause. What causes this illness? What causes this condition? How do Africans conceive the concept of cause? Personhood, which is self and community in African thought. Therapeutic modalities for African communities. This is what we expose our students. And every time they go and see patients, we would like to see how they are using this practically. Moving beyond the BPS, an Afrocentric approach to clinical diagnosis. I'm sure you know, though, I assume I'm talking to a lot of psychologists. We do diagnosis. But what does it mean to diagnose in the African thought? Collaborative approach to child and family therapy. Basic tenets and assumptions and illustrative case examples. And I also talk to them about developmental stages. because you'd agree with me that the way Freud's developmental stages is about sex and all the other things, obsession with kids that are having attraction towards their parents, and I'm sure when I speak to Africans, they'll say, no. It doesn't happen. No. You can't have feelings towards your mother and the girl towards the father. But this is what we are taught. Maybe it be applicable in their context. You know, people such as the psychosocial stages. Who does that? Is that Eric Erikson? Psychosocial stages. And I always say to students, you see in my culture, whilst the stages said autonomy versus independence, in my culture, if I am too independent to the extent of not looking after my family, then there's pathology. You see, because my being or my success is evaluated according to the contribution I make to the family and to society, to the community. And what did the conquerors say? They've introduced a new concept so that you don't look after each other. And they call it black tax. And we have bought into it. Hey, I'm tired of paying black tax. Even people that sold their cows and everything to take you to school, in order to give back, you think now it's black tax. You see the different ways in which these things come back to us. Building on the indigenous theory and practice of marriage therapy, we look into how we bring back our ways of understanding marriage and the interventions in marital therapy. And then the healing modalities, and now they have to now go and see patients and come back, and we supervise, and we want to see if they can apply this, you see. So, having shared this with you, this small section of what we are doing, and we are not saying is the ultimate. There's still so much that we have to do together. Because one of the things that we are aware of, these are just translations, but that was the first phase. As you can see, even the concepts that we're using are still Western in nature. The next phase in the 5 years that I'm still left with at the university, we are going to now locate this course in the actual real African terminology. Yeah, and we are going to use the experiences of people such as Prof. Kakata to really harvest this indigenous knowledge system and see it in our curriculum. So why do we have to decolonize education, curriculum, and research? I'm sure my favorite author there, Linda Smith. When indigenous people become the researchers and not merely the research, the activity of research is transformed. Questions are framed differently, priorities are ranked differently, problems are defined differently, and people participate on different terms. In our case, we define and design the curriculum on our terms. We no longer allow people to come and say, this is the blueprint. We bring in our lived experiences. And this is what I thought I would show you what we did. A lot of work went into, because we also had to comply. Whilst, Prof, we are disobedient epistemologically, we still had to comply. But how do we comply with the epistemology that is still Western? What we did was to, in order to change this course, we had to re-look at, and the changes were more than 50%. When I took over, I said, no, we cannot carry on with this. I'm not going to be one of those that are in power, but there's no change. So we had to do more than 50% changes. And we know, according to the Health Professions Council, when you do that, there are processes. So we put our course through different school board, university senate, and council approval. And what that meant was that after that, we took it through to the Health Professions Council, and the Health Professions Council approved it. We took it through to the Department of Higher Education, approved. We took it to the Council of Higher Education, approved. And so what I'm talking to you about now is in our PQM. And what this meant was that we had to change from 180 credits to 240 credits to change or to reflect all the changes that we've put into the course. And what I was excited about was actually to change the format of assessment, because we know exams carry a lot of weight. So what we did was to say in our PQM, continuous assessment is 50%, exam is 50%. I'm sure when they come back in 2028, I'm going to say exam is 30%, so that we align ourselves with the best practices in the world, in which exam is not taking precedence over everything, but continuous assessment, because we don't want a student that has got a bad day during exam, and then they fail when they've been performing well. So this is what we did in order to comply, because we still had to comply. And so, in conclusion, I would like to also look or reflect on the word of Naim Akbar, one of my favorite authors in the USA. In 2013 in New Orleans, there was a legacy project for him. And this is what I liked about what was written on the legacy project. And these are his words. If we know, accept, and appreciate who we are and what we can do, we can retake control of our thinking, because our thinking has been taken, our ideas, and build institutions that are reflective of the best that we can be. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you.
Thank you, Professor Baloy, for an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. I think what you're doing at Sefako Masafaka University is truly inspirational, and there's a lot we can learn as an institution that is also committed to decolonizing our curriculum. Colleagues, we'll now have Professor, our own, Zetu Kakata. Professor Kakata is a full professor in the Department of Psychology at UNISA. She has extensive experience in the field of research and has worked as both an academic and a researcher in several institutions, including Statistics South Africa, Department of Psychology at the University of Pretoria, the Human Sciences Research Council, the Reproductive Health Research Unit, and the University of the Western Cape. Professor Kakata's scholarship is in the field of African epistemologies, and she has produced work that advocates for the usage of indigenous languages for epistemic purposes. She has demonstrated this advocacy in publications such as The Place of Indigenous Languages in the New Curriculum, an African Psychology Case Study. Safety Nestled in isiXhosa is the Psychology of a People. When Ukutelwa, Ukuzalwa becomes bride price, spiritual meaning lost in translation. And then also, all who speaks colonial languages, childhoods rooted in land. This work has earned the UNISA Scholarship Award in 2022. and the Association for Black Psychologists Scholarship Award in 2019. She has recently published books entitled Still to be Named, An Exploration of African Epistemologies Using Siphiwe Dana's Selected Work, and Azibuye Amasizweni, I hope I'm spelling it correctly, Reclaiming Our Space, Centering Our Knowledge. So colleagues from that, you can see there's no better qualified person to respond to Professor Baloy's presentation. So please join me in welcoming Professor Kakata.
Thank you, Program Director. We really got your tongue twisting. Okay, colleagues, to our esteemed guest today, who's really not a guest, Professor Lisiba Baloyi, who's also my brother. To the Deputy Dean, Professor Mashawa, and the Deanery at large, as well as our college management at large. To our acting COD, Dr. V. To you colleagues, I greet everyone. Somebody said it's really stupid to use all the official languages to greet. So I won't say Dimacheroni or Dumela, because I really don't want to feel stupid at this moment. I guess, colleagues, it's appropriate as I honor Professor Lisiba Baloyi to also pay a little tribute to those who came before us, especially Professor Manganyi, whose works mentored us, whose works ensured that we are able now to introduce those languages that were never taught, that were never thought they will feature in anything that has to do with what is called academia. Today we are able to say us too have a psychology because of them. Professor Manganyi, in his work, which was produced in the early 1970s, says, it was amazing when he was looking out there to see these vibrant, wonderful, black and proud students and their leaders who would stop at nothing to express themselves. And that inspired him to question the structures that ensured that the system he was working for existed, the structure that actually ensured that departments such as psychology stand. And what continues to make these people unwell is the very system. Hence, he started to write works like Being Black in the World. We honor people like him and also people like Professor Baloyi, especially people like Professor Baloyi, Professor Ramosa. I'm gonna name my favorites, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize and many others, scores of other people, for ensuring that those who come after Prof. Manganyi, that there is continuity. There's nothing as wonderful as using work to teach of people whose names you can relate to, of people who are alive, because we come from a psychology where each time they mentioned, I remember I was taught by Professor Garth Stevens' personality. Each time he would mention all of these teachers, these scholars who have influenced this personology, you had to imagine a departed white man. There was never an opportunity where you can relate. I think the first time ever I was in shock when I was in an elective of gender psychology, that they mentioned Professor Cheryl Delaray, and she was said to be alive. I couldn't believe that a person who writes books, who's quoted in class, could be alive. It was a shock. So what I'm trying to say, colleagues, is that we come a long way. Professor Baloyi highlighted a very painful reality of black people not knowing how to use their power. It's painful and sad in the sense that, you know, when you go home crying, when these walls have battered you, and the first thing your parents will tell you is that it's like you've forgotten whose child you are. And it's something that Professor Baloyi highlighted as well, because it's an important expression of always remembering who we are. Who are we as African people? Why is it important for us to know is the Thakazelo zethu, which Professor Ramaso say we shouldn't say is our praise, our clan names. We should rather call us the important identifier of ourselves, identifiers of who we truly are. Why is it important to know those? Because it is in times like this, in times when we are entrusted with responsibility, that we have to draw from within. Steve Biko calls it inward looking, where we have to draw from ourselves, from the true meaning of who we are. There is an actor in South Africa, George Zamdela. You remember him from Isidingo, right? The Tsotsi guy who spoke Tsotsital. I was listening to his interviews during lockdown, and they were asking him, why had you been silent? Where have you been? And he said, at some point I was ill, so I couldn't do anything for a long time. And they were asking what really happened. He said, no, man, you know how he speaks. He's very informal in his language. And he said, I was not well at all. I remember this one time, I thought I was really dying. And something in me said, look at you, man, who are you? And it's Thakazelo sakhe ngufakade, I think God lamini. And ufakade, you know what it means, right? If you do not know, it's your homework. And he said, no, I remembered that in ngufakade, the one who died, who takes long to die, something similar. It's not a proper translation. And he said, that woke me up. I'm not supposed to be giving in to death. That is the sense of knowing who you truly are. So that when you are entrusted with power, you know how to use it to your benefit. Everyone, those who've colonized the world, they knew exactly how to use power to their benefit. So what is stopping us from using power to our own benefit? Not in ways that will oppress others, but in ways that will uplift the oppressed. Prof. Baloyi made me want to go re-register and start the psychology they are teaching. Because in Western schools, it is where definitions of things are made, are constructed. Schools, it's where they made us sit. As he also alluded, that is not how we do education, where we gather people. And the aim of creating a space where we define things, we explain things, and we dictate what is knowledge is exactly that, to dictate what knowledge is and to exclude others. So you create these grand narratives, and whatever we build around it. And people, when you write papers, will say, but you didn't contextualize it. And by that, they mean you didn't westernize, you didn't draw from the West, and you look at it from a Western perspective, and then you come to your own. And some people like myself are saying we don't want to do that. Not that I do not know what Erickson said, as Prof. Baloyi said earlier. I know very well what he said, and it's really not relevant to what I want to say. And another important factor about school is that it teaches us what terms mean, certain concepts would mean through this creation of grand narratives. For example, if I may ask each one of you now, what do we mean by the concept of culture? How do we define culture? I'm sure already certain images in your heads are popping up, because we have been trained to think that culture belongs to some and knowledge to others. And those who own knowledge do not have a culture. So culture is something that is downright there, that doesn't belong to these walls. Forgetting that, I like the title of Prof. Baloyi's presentation, because it demystifies exactly that. Culture belongs to everyone. Everyone has a culture. All psychology is cultural psychology, because they even create these subcategories of psychology, because theirs is a psychology of knowledge, ours is a psychology of culture. Forgetting that culture is actually enactment of knowledge. If you have knowledge, you would have culture. And there's no one who can have just culture and not have knowledge. Because we create these symbols, these ways of doing things, because culture is the doing of knowledge, is the practicalization of our epistemologies, is the practicalization of our philosophies. We get that from so we all have philosophies that we put into action through culture, and language really helps us to label those, to put label. We label our objects in the way that they make meaning to us. So everyone has that, therefore everyone has knowledge. We are in psychology, so Prof. Baloyi took us to all these Western definitions of what psychology exactly is, from a point in time when they spoke of it as something that only concerns the mind, when philosophy really was the dictate of knowledge, to a time when it was said to be inclusive of other things such as the psyche, the soul, and the consciousness, which are all interconnected. So they define psychology along those lines. But when we ask, what exactly does this psychology do? Like Prof. already said that, but it heals. So if it does that, that means everyone, at every culture, every society, at some point, they would have this need to make its people well, meaning everyone has this thing, the epilisayo, right? They call it psychology. Prof has urged us to use that in protest. Nathi sinayo lento ipilisayo, the thing that makes us well, the things that heals us, and we call it many different names. Prof, in his work, Prof. Baloyi, uthi moya, and I didn't really get. I understood that it's a matter of spirit, which because our cultures are spiritual. But the moment that it really hit me, the true meaning of it, was when I sat with my student and we were reading and discussing this together. And she could really, I could tell that she was understanding it at a deeper level, a true understanding of things. It was unlike when we would talk about, for example, things like double consciousness, where you can tell that she's operating from a superficial level. But when she was teasing out this theory, Tsamoya, I could really see that she has hit a light bulb, because it makes sense to her reality. It makes sense to her as a person. And she could draw from examples that from home, which is what's important, because we are teaching children to go back home. And I'm telling you, with this psychology, nobody even calls on you when there's grief in the family, when there's bereavement. As a psychologist, no one has ever asked me anything as a psychologist at home, which is so sad, because they spend all their money on my education, yet it's so useless. Because it is in times like grief when it should come in handy. We have a healer here. We have a trained healer, right? But it's never really What is it and they do heal from grief. What is it that they draw from? So the kind of work that Prof. Lisiba brings to life is exactly that which they run to when they don't come to you at home and say, I'm sure, Prof, they never say to you, come with your therapy. So people sit around and they deal with grief. We talk through things. And if we stay that whole week at home, by the time Saturday, the day of the funeral comes, you are feeling a little better. You are in control of your emotions. So what is it that we draw from? Psychology that we know that has healed people for centuries, because I believe we are only a fraction. People with Western education, qualifications are only a fraction. When I worked for Stats SA, I used to look at that statistics of how many people have tertiary education qualifications. There's very few of us. And other people don't even have, yet here they are surviving with us. They tell us that fourth industrial revolution is to move forward, but there are people who never even entered the second industrial revolution, even the first one, yet they are still amongst us. What is it that they draw from? Are the questions that I believe the work of Prof. Lisiba and his team at his university are doing, and beautifully so teaching, which we appreciate so much, because this is what takes the works of people like Utatu Manganyi forward. You mentioned Baba Naim Akbar and Dr. Wade Nobles. About Dr. Wade Nobles, you reminded me of something you once said when you were speaking about all of these Western psychologists who theorized before others. And I remember him saying, it is important to know them and also what they theorize, and to see it was not universal. They were looking at the world that is relevant to themselves in the same way that Professor Manganyi was looking at the world that had this powerful movement, which was called Black Consciousness Movement, and started to write from it, in the way that our forebears were looking at the environment, at the people who had access with land, when they theorized through our proverbs, our metaphors, all of the figurative language. If you notice, it draws from nature, from livestock, because it's pointing to a time when we had access to our land, we had access to our environment, we had access, we could have our livestock, we could think about the rivers, we could tell you that the strength of a crocodile is in the water, because we had interaction, unlimited interaction with our environment. Unlike in the present day where everything is controlled, it has to be curated, it has to be a zoo in order for us to access. And that gives us a superficial understanding of it, because our theorizations, how we do philosophy, it comes from the freeness of life, this interaction that Prof was telling us about, that people would connect. All right, I wanted to say that last, but let me just say it, which also touches on what you said about the importance of language. You quoted, is it Bourdieu? Yeah, when he speaks of relationality, we relate, therefore we are. And I loved that so much. I love his work, because that is important. Also, Prof. Ramos explains it beautifully, the concept of a relational ontology, how we look at life and reality as it's something that is not separated. We don't think of life in fragmented terms, but as an interconnection of oneness and wholeness. It's Prof. Ramos who puts it that way. And when we draw from our languages, the concept of relatedness, to be related, amaXhosa athi kukuzalana, and we know the philosophical significance of uana, because it's the communication of relationality. That ana, ukuzalana, we give birth to one another as a people. That is why we wrote with Prof. Ramose the paper called When Ukucelwa Ukuzalwa Becomes Bride Price, questioning the whole notion of ilobola, because when it is translated to bride price, it introduces impressions of capitalism. Now there is there is materiality involved, yet it was a spiritual exercise, because you are asking for birth relation. Ukuzalwa is to birth. So ukuzalana, now we are becoming one. We are becoming a oneness. We're calling for birth relations. So we are becoming families. That is, the two families are becoming one. So ukuzalana also is not only limited to human relations, but also with the environment. Siyaphilisana with neighbors, siyaphilisana with plants and animals, because they are the source of our life. With the galaxies as well, there is that interconnection, the relatedness of it all. All right, I think, Prof, that is all I could respond to. The question of responding is actually very unnatural to me, because we are raised, we are raised, ukuthi singaphenduli. Ukuphendula is something that is frowned upon. But I really appreciate your work. I was also touched when you say it is important because in our interaction with people as healers in psychology, you say it is important to they call it empathy, but usibiza uvelwano. See, ukuvelana, I don't even know how to translate it. But ukuva is to feel. Ukuva is that one major sense in our languages where it explains a lot of other senses. So the sense of the perception, when our bodies perceive another stimulus, if we may call it that way. But ukuvelana is being one, to be in touch with another person's feelings while they are in touch with yours. It's a relational way of perception. When we understand our patients from how they understand themselves, you also find that they even see their own treatment. They can even envision their own medicine, what you could use. They just needed you to be there to show that you hear what they are saying, you are hearing them, you are feeling them, you are in one sense, so that you allow them that, because sometimes they need to unlock their own healing through you. So that is how it is important to understand where people come from, how they see their own world, how they think it should be treated. With those words, I say we remain encouraged, Prof, with the work that you are doing. It's healing work. Sometimes you might think you are only teaching at Sifako Mahato, yet you're reaching other places. It will be, well, you won't find out that now. But maybe when you are many years in retirement, how many people you healed through what you were doing. So, and I would like to urge us colleagues to do not doubt what you're thinking. It's very valid and it is knowledge because we are controlled by these grand narratives to think a certain way about what knowledge is. Where you come from is a community of knowledge. What your parents taught, your grandparents, your neighbors, and your community at large is valid knowledge. I draw from my great-grandmother, whom I didn't understand at the time that she was the greatest teacher I've ever had. When she would fight for people to pronounce isiXhosa word properly, to pronounce them, to feel the meaning, you could even, she was a tiny thing like this. She was in her late 90s at the time. I come from a family that lives very long. She was not the only one. Others would, I've seen great-grandparents who lived until they were 130 or so. And this, my great-grandmother always fought for the pronunciation of words. She was always calling radio stations, correcting people when they mispronouncing isiXhosa word. And I never thought I was learning. And my other cousin would make fun of her, pretending to be reporters from TV stations. And my grandmother would just, with so much pride, give them interviews, give them an audience. And I would just sit quietly. I was never really participating in that. And it turns out I was the one who learned the most from that exercise, from observing that. Because I think her greatest fear was that to lose those languages would be to lose our knowledge, to lose our philosophies, and to not know that we actually did have our own psychology from which people are still benefiting now, like the psychology of umoya, which is our very own. It is that kind of psychology. Imagine if we allowed such concepts as umoya to go and extinct. We wouldn't even believe that we actually do have knowledge. So thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kakata. She's one of us, Professor Baloy. So there's hope for us. I think we should work on that contract. So colleagues, we've had Professor Baloy's presentation, and then obviously Professor Kakata's response. We are now going to give you the opportunity to engage with Professor Baloy and Professor Kakata. I'm not sure if there's any questions on or comments on the Teams platform. I think there's one question from one of our colleagues, Professor Baloy. Thank you very much, Professor Baloy. What is of great interest to me is how do we represent misconstrued African traditions like ukutwala? Can you go up? Lobola and virginity testing in literature without trivializing them, because they also play a role in some issues we have of violence in our African context. And then there's another comment from Notlanhla Masinga. Again, thank you, Professor Baloy. Your talk speaks directly to us. As sharers of knowledge, we need to be observant and in touch of the communities we serve. Our students need to be able to find the truth in what they are learning. We appreciate what you are doing. in making sure that African epistemologies are not only an add-on conversation, but actually forms part of the curriculum and are given their much-deserved authority. So that's a comment, Professor Baloy, and then a question. And then another comment, I agree with Professor Lesiba and see this as a return to cosmological coherence beyond mere restoration of the just science or epistemologies. This high level of cosmological restoration, reimagination, and ongoing healing promotes cultural and multicultural congruence and relevance to people's lives and is central to the post-colonial and anti-colonial project. The aim is to restore human dignity and to restore local cultures with honor in the wake of colonialism and with due regard for environmental, ecological health and well-being. This also applies to mixed, complex, multiple emergent ethnicities and cultures beyond static views of monoculturalism. The long-term aim is to heal epistemicides, ethnicides, and insane-making splits of the past. Also noteworthy is that similar projects are and have been occurring in Europe, such as resistance to ruthless empires and colonizer states and global corporations, for example, Watkins and Schulman's towards psychologies of liberation. Yes, a relational stance to others and nature is called for, as central to cosmological, ontological, and cultural restoration and well-being. Well done, Professor Baloy. Keep growing the new curriculum. Best wishes and my apologies that I could not be there today, Johan Kruger. So 2 comments, 3 comments, Professor Baloy, and 1 question. Would you take the question now? And I'm not sure, you took some notes when Professor Kakata spoke. I'm not sure if you want to respond to her response as well.
We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Okay, mine is to thank Prof. Kakata for the response. We rely heavily sometimes on her knowledge and her writings to argue for the issue of languages. And so, I mean, it's not surprising me to just hear how she quickly taught me what empathy is, the actual meaning of empathy. You know, and these are the kind of things that we need, because we have to start to use this, because empathy as we understand it from Rogers could be misleading in our context. So thank you very much for that. But also the differentiation that you drew between culture and knowledge, and how culture sometimes it's located within a particular community or certain communities, and knowledge is only the privilege of the white man. When I was here at UNISA, we used to hear, we used to have professors, I'm sure some of them are still here, that used to do community psychology and write lots of papers. They've never been in any community, you know. So, and when I asked, they said, no, communities for you, Dakis. We do actual academic work, which is writing. You know, that's why they would send students to go and collect information, which is very disrespectful and unethical. That's stealing, but it doesn't surprise us. They've been stealing forever, especially as far as knowledge is concerned. But to just send students to go and source knowledge from a particular community. If I was in government, I would suggest that we arrest such people because it's stealing a valuable resource. And therefore, I'm very happy, and I think I'll go back to my students and elucidate this kind of differentiation and to show the relationship between culture and knowledge. Thank you so much. But as for the people that laid the foundation for us, I agree with you that we really have to build on the works of Prof Mangani in particular, because I don't think he finds we give him the relevant and appropriate appreciation, especially given the time that he lived in and what he was able to write about the system that was so brutal. So I think as teachers we have a responsibility, those of us that have not accustomed ourselves with his work, to go back and maybe see what he wrote about and how relevant is it today, because I think it's as relevant as it was then. And to the colleagues, and I suspected that long lecture comment was from Johan. I just knew that's Johan Creer. By the way, just as a way of appreciating Johan, to those colleagues that do not know, if one looks at my PhD, Johan and Professor Stan Lifshitz are there because Johan and Professor Stan Lifshitz helped me to conceive my PhD. I call them T something in my PhD, because without fail every morning they'll take me down to the cafeteria here and we'll talk about my PhD, and I'll talk to them about the anxiety and the inability to articulate what I wanted to say. Because Johan is well read, he would assist me and tell me that, Lesiba, just believe in what you're saying, as Prof. Takata said. And they are the people that shape my thinking, and I just want to honor Johan for all the comments and for who I am. He really contributed immensely to who I have become, and I still will become, or I will be. The question of Ugutwasa, Lobola, the testing of virginity, let me first start with the one I'm not so sure of, because people that are sure of will talk to that. But in virginity, I agree, the testing of virginity, I agree that there are tendencies to go overboard, and it can be abusive, it can be intrusive, and therefore I think we have to source the appropriate ways of conducting these processes, because they've got value. I mean, if you think of going to the mountain, what do they call? Uwaluka. If we think about it, I went, by the way, and the people that were there at the time knew how to do this. And it was hijacked. Now it's hijacked for commercial purposes. It's hijacked, and in the main is because we did not engage the elders and the people that are doing it because of the conditions of poverty and so on, cut corners. But there are cultural appropriate ways, and we need to just go down to the communities and those, the sides of knowledge, community and elders as sides of knowledge. Go back to them and orientate ourselves appropriately, and not just hear what is done and do it like the professors that send our students, the black students, to the communities to collect knowledge. So I would urge that we engage people, because they are still there, those that are trained to do virginity testing, Ukuthwasa, I'm not qualified to talk about it, but it's there in my PhD because I come from a family of the traditional healers. So it is, I grew up seeing my aunts and the people, my relatives who were imbued with this spiritual connectedness, and who would, sometimes when we perform rituals, who would go into a trance. And some of the stories I can tell you, you'll never believe them, that he's late now, that when he's in a trance, he would come to us and ask for marijuana. And later, when he's out of that, and I say, but you wanted daka, he say, me. Oh, Ning, I just woke up, I was sleeping. What are you talking about? You know, in one of the instances, because he became a gobela, and he was in a trance, and he was dancing on top of the mahalaging coal, ne? Yeah, it was red, and he was dancing on this red coal, and I was so worried that he's going to burn because it was red, and he was just dancing. And at the end, when he was okay, my concern was just to go and check if he's not burned. And he was okay. And I thought, how possible is this? That he has been dancing on this for a while, and he's okay. But this concept of ukuthwasa is so important, and it's bigger than what we think, because it connects different realities. And it taps into knowledge that is not readily available to us. And so it's very important that we orientate ourselves and understand it before we judge. The lobola issue, indeed, people think differently about lobola, but I don't think we are in the business of proving to people what it means. But I can just give an example of what my uncle told me about lobola, because I also used to question it until my sister was getting married from the other family. And as you would know, we don't have cousins, Runamos. There's our brothers and sisters. That's why I still today don't know which one is a nephew, which one is a cousin. I always mix. You have to say, is it a male or female? Otherwise I get confused, because I call them brothers and sisters. So this old man said to me, Lisiba, this process is very important. And in the process of negotiations, because they were teaching me how to negotiate, because they said, we are getting old, you must learn, you must see, and you must see the significance of this. And as we were going forth and backwards with this negotiation, the old man said, during our caucus, I am worried about this family. He had done an analysis of the family through the uncle and the mother. And he said, these are not human beings. And at the end of it all, I don't know if it's a cousin or nephew who got married, but eventually the son was very abusive, and the marriage did not work, And then he said, what did I tell you? So this process of lobola, negotiations and so on, despite its symbolic meaning, making the two families to meet and to know each other, there are many other associated meanings which we need to orientate ourselves before we can. Of course, these days it's also used like all the other systems, law, economics. I mean, if you consult a lawyer now, you wouldn't believe that this is a consultation fee for 20 minutes. Huh? It's 3,000 for 20 minutes, So even lobola, it's used for that. Very recently, someone said, because you've got daughters, are you going to get them to, how much are you going to charge? I said, hey, it's going to be very difficult, but I'll find a way, I'll consult in such a way that it's not commercialized, because we have to respect what it stands for. Thank you, Prof. Adonis.
Thank you, Prof. Professor Selinda has asked me to relay a comment to both Professor Baloy and Professor Kakata. Kakata. Thanks. Professor Selinda says Professor Baloy's insight into African psychology are valuable. He asks the right questions and touches on relevant aspects that are often neglected. It is evident that the psychology we've been taught does not fully consider the diverse nature of African cultures and experiences. Professor Baloy not only highlights these gaps, but also actively develops research to bridge them using innovative methodologies that respects and incorporates African perspectives. His work is paving the way for more inclusive and accurate understanding of psychology that truly reflects the richness of African diversity. Thank you, Professor Baloy, for your groundbreaking contributions to the field. And then Professor Kakata, Professor Selinda is proud that we have you as a colleague. You are the best person to respond to Professor Lesiba's lecture, given your extensive research on knowledge and healing. Your experiences as a student, where you seldom saw African scholars quoted in textbooks, resonates deeply with many of us. And you powerfully reminds us not to doubt our knowledge, as our communities are rich knowledge systems in themselves. Moreover, your use of examples from your family members provide rich, nuanced understanding of these concepts, making your insights invaluable for advancing this critical discourse. Colleagues, any questions? Dr. Maseko, I know you have a question.
Oh, no.
You switch the mic on.
Oh, it's on now. Thank you, technology. Thank you, colleagues.
Name?
My name is Wandile Tabete. I'm a postdoctoral fellow under the mentorship of Prof. Fori. For me, it's a comment. At the same time, it will be a question to both speakers. The first comment is, they can respond, both of them. I had a conversation with my cousin, who's a postdoc now at Stellenbosch. And because he's interested in also, we're in the same field in corrections. But we sat one day and we asked each other, what is prison in our context? We are Swatis, we're both Swatis. And we didn't know what is prison because we're interested in corrections. And then he was like to me, I think we should call my aunt, her aunt, his aunt. And then we called my grandmother, because when we start to conceptualize these papers or anything that we write in the African context, we get stuck because we don't know a lot. And my grandmother, for the fact that she said to me, I will need to sleep and think about it, it said a lot to me and to him, because we're asking what is corrections or what is prison in the Swati context, what was prison before? And then in the morning when she woke up, she said to me, we never had such before. And then I was like, but then if someone has done something wrong, what were you doing? And then she gave us an example to say, they would say in the Swazi context, go and cross 7 rivers to the south, and which means they were literally chasing you out of the country. And then I said, if someone has been accused of killing someone or witchcraft. What were you doing before? What did you do before? And then she was like, there's a mountain back at home, it's called Inyonyane. They will go, all the warriors will take you there. There will be likhotla and there will all those processes, but they will end up, if you are found guilty, you will be taken to that mountain and you will be forced to commit suicide because you have done something that is out of the Swati context, to be saying you can cross 7 rivers, which is like go out of the country. That's the first thing. And I would like to know from the audience, what is prison in your own context, in the African context? Because I'm in the space of corrections, and with the mentorship of Prof. Rory, every day I ask myself a lot of questions when he teaches me and he mentors me. And I find myself saying, lecturally, I don't relate, I don't know what is correction. And then the other question is not a question. I have a student who is a social worker, master's. When he came to me, Prof has been talking about grief. But then I realized that the student doesn't understand what is grief in his context. And given that he works in correction as a social worker, I had to ask him to say, what happens when someone has offended? Someone has lost someone and has offended. This comes back from me when I was working in corrections. I was interested in studying the grieving process of the Swati people when we are incarcerated, because we have rituals that we do. We have traditions, culture, practices that we practice as Swatis. But then I realized that when you're in corrections, all those are taken away from you. And what does that mean? And how does that have an impact in my mental health? Because you'll see that if I was away, I'll come back home and they will say, Hamba uyobeka liche. You understand? And they don't have that in corrections. So I say to the student, go and give me a story. As a social worker, what happens when someone has lost someone and is in correction? What is the grief? And the last one is a student that we asked to say, go and look to say, what are the practices that women are taking, these African practices as a woman grieve, because we will not shy away that men in the African context, we grieve differently, and women, there's a symbol. There are a lot of things I've seen that my grandmother lost her husband. She cut her hair. There were so many rituals that were prepared, but then I was like, but my grandfathers have been losing their wives, but such things have not been happening. So we say to the student, go and give us a story. What happens to women who are in corrections and they don't have this opportunity to grieve Prof. Adonis, who's their husband now? So I'm bringing to the speakers to say, what does that mean? None of them has spoken about the African context in corrections. And this is where many men are there. Last one is a student who's doing PhD. He came with a biopsychological etiologist. And one of the co-supervisors said, how does this relate to us as Africans? But he's looking at gender-based violence in the corrections. And the co-supervisor was like, what is gender-based violence in the African context? What causes gender-based violence in the African context? What is gender-based violence? And these are the questions that comes to my mind to say, both speakers spoke a lot, but none of them spoke about those people that are in corrections and what do we say about them when it comes to the African context. Because they are in, for me, when my grandmother told me the story, I felt like they are in a Western world. That never existed, but now it exists. So how do we intervene as psychologists? Thank you.
Colleagues, the first question was to you, and it was about corrections and what is prison. And then the other questions was for Professor Baloy and Professor Kakata. Any response?
I think, thank you, Prof. Adonis. My name is Busiso Masego. As Prof. Adonis correctly prophesized. I think he's a prophet. I do have a question. I think my question is to Prof. Baloyi. I'm glad he spoke about his experience in terms of the practical side of implementing a curriculum which is Africanized and decolonized. I think for me, and this is a question to him, but it's also got a comment in it, I think we're in a very privileged position in history where we get the opportunity to really relook at the curriculum. So this is probably unprecedented in the history of black people, you could say, in this country. So it's a great opportunity, but what I've found is that the very institutions that write these beautiful policies around curriculum transformation do not create an enabling environment for that to happen. I'll give you an example. So when you think or rethink or try to rethink, let's say, an introduction to psychology textbook, for instance, first year psychology, the question of standards and is it portability, very technical curriculum concepts. How does a student then move from UNISA to WITS or to UCT? And these are questions of standards, and they get framed as standards. Now, you're writing, you're imagining, you've got this moment in history to really challenge this curriculum or the traditional canon, and then you get told about standards. So how can we create an enabling environment for scholars in psychology to really reimagine this curriculum without then, bringing back the very Western ideas that eventually constrict and act as an obstacle for what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Shall we take those for now?
I'm going to respond, obviously, to one. I think I will take the question of grief. I believe that the entire decolonial project is about dismantling the system that makes us to think a certain way, because some of the things we claim are African, belong to African culture. So hence I always go to language, because when you use language, you are able to trace where words come from, when certain terms came to life in our culture. I'm trying to attempt to answer the question of grief and how women are said to be grieving culturally compared to men. Because I once read a Xhosa text where this person was explaining, I think it was fictional, but fictional work actually is an expression of our realities. And they were explaining that women didn't have to go through a lot of rituals because their bodies naturally respond to grief. I'm sure women, there would be instances in your family as women where you would foresee it, or you would go through it physically, your body, in terms of your menstrual cycle and other things, your dreams and other things. You go through that process and you grieve. A lot of people will tell you about their experience of grief before it even happens. And they said that a man actually would have to undergo a lot of grief rituals, because this person wrote it very creatively, that because their bodies are so stiff, they don't really pick up the cues from the cosmos quickly, as quick as women. So that brought me to question, so why now is it the burden of women to bear all these symbols of grief? And if you trace the missionary history in the Eastern Cape, you will actually find exactly where, because some of these rituals were rituals of the so-called Royal House of England that they brought along, or things that they would introduce because they were in a foreign land. when they used to acknowledge that it's actually Africa is foreign to them, they would introduce like the wearing of the black cloth, for example. It's said to be one of the princesses of that house who couldn't stop mourning the passing of their husband. So we adopt this. How it's introduced to our culture is actually through Christianity, which is very interesting. This dressing of a particular way by women, not showing certain things, actually comes from Christianity. So it was introduced through the missionary processes. So I would urge you, when you read culture, you read it from that perspective. What are the words that are being used to explain this process? Because there you will find a lot of coloniality. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to leave the other part about corrections to Prof. But I will quickly say that even with corrections, I will give you a paper that's interesting. Prof. Ramos wrote about law and the legal processes from an African perspective, Lihutla, and what happens there, and who gets to decide the punishment. Because as Prof. Baloyi said, we do things in relation. Relationality is the core of our practices. So they didn't believe in isolating you after you have erred, but to correct uyalungiswa. That's why when they were looking for a word for our justice system, they said zezobulungiswa, because you're supposed to be corrected, brought back to life. Because whatever you do that is wrong, you lose your humanity. Ubuntu, you earn it. It's an end status. It's not a biological denotation, but you earn it through by being ethical in your actions. So once you go astray, you must be brought back to ubengumntu in relation to those around you or the environment. Maybe you have mistreated a particular grazing land and the cattle won't be able to graze, and then you'll bring famine to the community. So there's always that interrelationality of things. So our law is informed by that. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Kakata. I think you have helped me through your response. I don't know which one to respond to, because I'm not so sure if I understand the context within which corrections are used. So, but all I want to say is that I've told my students, and more, the research that they are producing now, I encourage them not to think first from English and to indigenous. So I tell them to mess up first. I mean, to get the indigenous understanding, and they can mess up with the English understanding. Yeah. It doesn't matter for me. Because the English is not their language. So they'll be forgiven to do that. But they'll not be forgiven not to understand what it means in an indigenous context. So what I would urge my colleague to do is to, because you are a scholar, you are a researcher, not to end it with and. Go to other sides of knowledge. Expand and ask the elderly and the experts, the traditional gurus, what is this? But don't go and say what is grief, because if you say what is grief, you are contaminating the process.
Yeah.
Like my student was investigating, we have the dental school, anxiety, operative anxiety, the anxiety before you get operated. And he would go to clients and say, what is your understanding of anxiety? I said, no, you can't do it like that. You're contaminating the process. You're imposing a label, and from there they are going to operate according to that label. Ask them, how do they understand this and that and that? Because in our languages, you're not going to use one word. Let me give you an example with what I was talking about, umoya. I can give you 15 meanings of umoya. Ho na le moya o mobe, o na le moya o sa siamang, meaning that o na le pelo e mpe, ho fuka moya. It's all different things. You know, so you will have to explain. And one of the students many years ago demonstrated that we don't have one word, you feeling sad. No. Feeling sad, there are many explanations. I'm just using Swana because I assume that we are in Pretoria, otherwise I would use Chitonga. Moya haho uwezi, Pilani would understand this word. Yes. Moya haho kotlase, orobahile moya, all those things. So, Mina, if I were you, without really, I don't want to mess up the prison story, it needs to be investigated. So let's go out and ask what it means, but please don't go there and say corrections or grief. Understand from that point of view, and then we will come to translation, whether it's grief or not. But let's use this opportunity to visit sites of knowledge, because indeed, there's etymology, the study of the beginning of words, just to simplify it. One has got to go back to the etymology, and you'll be surprised how words have evolved over history. How words have, thank you, Prof. How words have evolved over time. If you take a word, for example, competition, the initial meaning of the word competition is not what we're dealing with now. You know, in its original language. And because I did philosophical psychology, now when I was in Greece, I really researched, because the things, as Prof said, the things that were very philosophical, I could go to the library and to the university named after these big names and see and ask what is the original meaning. And they always say in Greek. They hardly say in English. No. That's not their premise. That's not how they start. So we must start from us, our understanding of whatever concepts. Because as Prof. Ramos says in his book, chapter 3 of Philosophy Through Ubuntu, I think it's page 48, 46 to 49, thereabout. I've read that book more than 10 times. One would find exactly the problem of translation. So as long as you think of grief and you want the word that captures grief, you're off. Because you're going to misrepresent the experience and the meaning. So, Mina, I tell my students, they want to do autism spectrum disorder in the rural Limpopo. And I say, no, you don't go to Limpopo and tell people about autism spectrum disorder. You must ask them, how do they understand this? Let them give you the terminology. In fact, I say to them, don't write the researcher there. Ask those people, what is the research and what is methodology? And 2 of my students now have written researcher, research context, methodology in Isi Venda, Chivenda. Because they start from there, coming this way. So if we're going to start from the terminology that has already been developed for us, it is also, maybe one must be careful here, intellectual laziness, no? We need to research. And then, thank you for these questions. I hope, because I want to also research, especially someone asked about, I think it was online, the issue of other processes such as lobola. I've been wanting to write something about lobola for so long now. That interest is back. And then, Dr. Sibusiso, I fully agree with you, and I've gotten into trouble many times. But I think at my age, I no longer worry about getting into trouble. I don't need any positions any longer. So I can question. In fact, the reason why my journey in academia was delayed is because in the main I used to question. So they will tell you that you don't know where your professional journey lies. But I think you are so right, because the institutions we find ourselves, this included, and all actually, they play lip service. And that's why we need young academics to take them on and say, we need, for example, in these committees, we need different forms of understanding knowledge rather than you guys, because you are influenced by a particular epistemological paradigm and you're using it. We can't change. That's the question I asked at the very beginning. We can't change from the oppressor's paradigm. Otherwise, we're playing within the same rules that have been set. So I agree with you that, and that's bullying, academic bullying. When you hear someone says, how scientific, and as Odora Hoppers indicated in a paper that she wrote already in 2001, that there's no way a society can survive without science. When they want to bully you, they will ask you science, but whose science are they talking about? Standard, whose standard are they talking about? So that's a bullying tactic for compliance. And that's why when I did my PhD, and it's a while ago, if you look at my PhD, which is available here, it doesn't have your typical research methodology, subjects that I'm going to interview. I don't have those things. Because I said I don't want to do it. Luckily, I just had the supervisor who supported me. And I'm told the externals were very happy that I did not comply with the grant narrative. So where you stand, Doc, or Prof, you can actually influence how you would like things to be done, and you can challenge these systems. People used to tell me, as one of the professors said to me, when I said, I want to do this PhD with you. And then in our discussion, he said, actually, your research fits very well in general systems thinking. And so I thought about what he was saying. I said, Prof, I think you are historically and factually wrong. And I'll tell you why. Historically, I took him through the historical misrepresentations. And then I gave him facts. And I said, you see, this kind of thinking, it did not arrive now with the emergence of general systems theory in the late 50s into the 60s. It's as old as an African. So we're talking 500 years before the birth of Christ, or even a billion years before, if there was life then. So indeed, there are prescripts that are set, and institutions are a big, big, big problems. And we have to stand up. That's why I spoke about Senate. We have to remind people in Senate, but actually, why are we here? Why are we not talking about the business of academia? Because we continue to do this curriculum, and yet we're having Senate meetings, and we are told Senate is the highest academic body in the university. According to whose standard? What are they doing actually? What are we doing in Senate? So I agree with you. I got into trouble. I hope you are willing to get into trouble. But you won't, I can tell you. Just keep questioning. And we can actually even write a paper about this story of standard and refuse this bullying tactic. We have our own standard. At any rate, the people you research with, the people you talk to, it is the client from a therapeutic point of view. It is the client that sets the standard. Who am I to impose my standard on the client? That old thinking is gone. But thank you. I'm glad that we can now see where the problem lies to transformation.
Thank you, Professor Baloy. Any other questions, colleagues? Can go ahead.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Maleka Witumelo, ke ngwana ba Khatla. After this whole lecture and what has been said, I think I'm forced to use my African names. So my question is derived from what Prof. Baloyi said when he explained the story about the cousin, and he said someone has said "Hasibatu, batho ba hasibatu," and you could even feel the pitch of his voice changing when he said that. So I wanted to ask based on that connotation, because we grew up using those terms, or our elders rather using those terms. So I wanted to understand when you say batho ba gase batho or motho a se motho or motho o ke motho. From both professors, I would like to understand what it means from you as scholars, because I think I have researched more on the elders and in the black community, but I'd like to understand from the professors, what do they mean? Prof, you can also explain in Xhosa language about uluntu and all of those things. So I just wanted to pick your brains on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Nabakhatla. You see that uncle diagnosed whether they were human enough or not without using the DSM-5. I still have to, he's still alive. I still have to go to him and say, hey, let's develop this criteria. What criteria did you use? Yeah. So, Prof. Ramos has written, Prof. Mkhize has written about it. I think the professor here, because when I was here, what benefited me was to talk a lot to the African languages people, because I wanted to equip myself. And one of the professors I relied on, there was a Xhosa professor called Prof. Saul, I think. He left, I think he retired or something. And then we were left with his student, Prof. Majila, who Skepe Majila, who is a library when it comes to indigenous knowledges. But as you said, the problem we're sitting with is we don't talk to them because they are doing African languages, we're doing psychology. But we'll be surprised if we talk to historians, to language people, because we need the language to be able to articulate our ideas accurately. So that interaction is very, very important. The issue of goba motho le go se be motho is a very deep question about the quality of our relatedness. In other words, and how we come across in human interaction and the impact we have. To what extent do we show respect and what is that word? Uvelano. To what extent are we able to show these attributes? And what is the impact of how we come across in our relationships? Because are you dehumanized in your interaction with people, or do you feel like your human dignity, your integrity as a human being is recognized and respected? Or do you feel like, you just treated like an object? So for me, I think the uncle in that interaction looked at how disrespectful these people were, because they would impose their reality without listening to our side, which is Uvelano. And he was worried that our daughter is never going to have a voice here. So they're not going to treat our daughter as a human being that is deserving of respect, someone that has got integrity, someone that has got the spirit, as nobles call it, spiritness and spirit. So the starting point for me is when I look at someone, and this is Zulu, I think it's Zulu or Xhosa that says sawubona. What that means for me is that I see the spirit in you. So the treatment that I give to you must demonstrate that I see the spirit in you, and you responding back is an affirmation of the spirit in me, and together we are in that spiritual space. And it is characterized by many, many things, amongst them this respect, uvelano, and so on and so forth. But otherwise it needs a whole lecture so that I can also gather the people that guide me in this thinking, particularly Mkhize and Boramuse, BT and them. But the professor is also in that space here.
Okay, so Malika is a very naughty student. She is my student, and her thesis is Mutu.
Mutu.
So she's trying to copy now.
Oh, she doesn't want to go and research. I see.
I hope you've taken note of what Professor Baloyi has said, because that's everything that's entailed. I will go ahead, and if you haven't, but I trust that you have, refer you to his work, because he writes about, together with Prof. Ramos, about the state of becoming human, that to us you are not born umntu. You earn it as your actions earn you ubuntu bakho. You, by being ethical, like Prophet said, to those around you, to nature, because you don't just need to be respectful, like your granny tells you, you can't just be respectful at home. It must reflect outside in the neighborhood, the community, and the society at large. So those little lessons about ubangumtu you learn from home, you transfer them outside wherever you go. That's why Sibus Bangumtaka Bandlo, which is what Prof said at the beginning, whose child are you? Because you are a reflection of how you were raised, how Ubuntu was instilled in you from your family. So it's an end status, you earn it. But ungumtu umaleka gimutu. We're referring to how you relate to us, what your actions speak about where you come from. So basically it's that, and I expect you to expand on it in your thesis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professors Baloyi and Kakata. Colleagues, we've come to the end of our event. But before I hand over to our acting COD, there's a few comments. I think there's one last question for Professor Baloyi. Yeah. Let me read the comments first. COVID robbed us of mourning in our African way. As such, we see a different way of people healing in a way that is not familiar to us. Thanks, Professor Baloyi. I feel inspired. And then the same person, we also have traditional healers who are trained in Western epistemology, and they shy away from the knowledge base to turn our oral tradition into writing. It's frustrating. So those are comments. And then the question for Professor Baloyi, what is your take on syncretism / dual practice of Western mental health professionals who also assume a role of being a prophet or pastors in the church? do you think it can be something we propose to HPCSA or practice within a therapy space?
Is this the one? I don't understand
I also don't understand.
the word, it's big words, it's academics here, sing something, but they say it's dual practice of Western mental health professionals who also assume a role of being a prophet, pastor in the church. I think it's an area that I would feel uncomfortable to get into because I am in no space to prescribe what should happen. But I would say that it's very, very important to hear different voices and to see how other people understand the world and do their work. But we also know that we live in a space in which there are people that are dishonest. And this happens in all fields. It's not about one society. We have, for example, I'm sure you'd remember during state capture that the people that we think less of being corrupt, the accountants and CAs were part of that. Lawyers were part of that. So probably psychologists. So in every field, you do have crooks. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's very important. I am very much interested in prophet work and pastors. I engage them so that I can be enriched. But I become skeptical. For example, I was watching TV yesterday, and the guy was saying, what? Touch TV, pour water, and your children are no longer going to be in the street. But just remember, deposit 1,000 in this account, and it's on TV. And I thought this borders on manipulation and other forms. But I'm interested in the work that prophets and pastors do, because they also play a healing. Those that are honest, like us psychologists, there are those among us that are not honest. We know that. That see people 5 minutes and they claim for an hour, especially in the hospitals. We know about these malpractices. But I think they are part of the multiplicity of voices within the healing space. And I cannot say they are right or wrong. And of course, I've written one of my papers, I think it's called Epistemological Exclusion. I've pointed how the Health Professions Council is failing us in the transformation agenda. And so in the very same way that they'll be critical about how they felt about the inclusion of traditional healers, I think it will be the same process. But eventually the traditional healers, through the Traditional Healers Act, are recognized. Their practice is recognized. Not that they needed anyone to recognize them, but I think it was important for collaboration, because there are things that we can do that we need to refer. But I don't know how the Health Professions Council would respond to this, because the Health Professions Council, like universities, as Ntate Swabuleti, the Health Professions Council is another layer that is standing in the transformation agenda, in the way of the transformation agenda.
Thanks, Prof. Colleagues, we've come to the end. I will now hand over to Dr. Nekevambe to do the vote of thanks and closing.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm not sure why I'm here anymore. Like, we have a lot of engagement. I think we should continue until 4 o'clock. So on behalf of the College of Human Sciences and the Department of Psychology, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Baloyi for delivering such an insightful and thought-provoking lecture on the imperative need for cultural parity and representative in the humanities and social science curriculum, drawing invaluable lessons from your clinical program. What I found profound for myself is the very initial statement: let's stop just talking about decolonizing our curriculum, but we must put it into practice. The questions that you had were reflective for me, because you asked, can we conquer using the conqueror's epistemological paradigm? We should be questioning ourselves in terms of our ethics in training our psychology students in South Africa that perpetuate a Western psychology that does not speak to our identity. We need an educational curriculum that reflects our identity. Who I am is related to where I come from. Ndingwana wanyi in my language. And having heard that and how powerful our languages is, from today on, you're all going to call me Bowawo. Because I realize the power my name has, and I've neglected it for the longest time. So I really appreciate this conversation. As I pronounce your names, so should you pronounce mine. Thank you. This presentation was so relevant, as decolonizing and transforming our curriculum is of utmost importance, as we are looking at honors recalculation at the moment. So I'm so happy to see colleagues like Dr. Maseko, Julia, all of us here. Wandile, I'm so happy to see you guys, because I know you are eager to develop decolonized programs. So I'm excited about this conversation. And I'm also happy to see that you continue developing decolonized programs that are approved. Therefore, it is not impossible, as many have alluded to. I'm glad, like I said, to see the colleagues who are here, now that we are eager to decolonize what we are teaching and transform the curriculum so that our education reflects who we are as the University of the Land. When Professor Kakata was responding, it dawned to me the challenges as we as scholars, our African scholars, go through. We have to translate our language to English. In that process, meaning is lost. And I think it's very frustrating to say something in Chivenda, now I have to translate it in English. The meaning, it does not sound the same at all. So, and this is an unjust to our own knowledge production. Moreover, Prof. Takata, we are deeply grateful for your thoughtful response to the lecture. Your reflections further enrich our understanding of the complexity surrounding the cultural imperative and representativeness in academic settings. Emphasizing the importance of collaborative efforts in effective positive change. I think we've had a lot of conversations where I'm also guilty of this, to say psychology does not, Chivenda does not have psychological language. And I think one of the conversation was we need to collaborate with African studies, linguistics, historians, and I think that's how we can also build language within this field. Prof. Baloyi also talked about the significance of incorporating diverse cultural perspective in academic curriculum, particularly in South Africa. It resonates deeply. It underscores the importance of fostering inclusivity and understanding within educational frameworks, not only to enrich the learning experience, but also to promote social cohesion and equity within our societies. The insights shared today serve as a catalyst for introspection and action, challenging us to reassess our approaches to education and curriculum development. By embracing cultural diversity and promoting representativeness in our academic endeavors, we can foster a more inclusive and equitable society where every individual's voice is valued and heard. I would also like to express gratitude to our Deputy Dean, Prof. Mashau, who's no longer with us. He's gone to another meeting, for welcoming us, the support from the deanery and the school director. And I would like to appreciate our COD, who started this whole process in absentia. She is the one who had this vision for us to have this conversation, and I think this was very powerful. And I thank her for this innovation idea. Prof. Adonis for being the program director, and everyone who engaged in today's lectures, the organizers. Pilani, thank you so much. In closing, I would like to express our sincerest appreciation to Prof. Baloyi and for the discussion, and Prof. Takata for your insightful response, and to all of us, thank you. I'm going to close it. So I'm a Venda woman. So in Chivenda, we don't, azwane, unyamande. Arifi mutu umpo roi mazwane. Riarosha azwane. Ndorivo. Thank you. Over to you, Program Director. No announcements. Colleagues, we are meeting at floor 5115 for refreshments, and just to meet and greet the prof. Oh, handover was done.
This whole thing, they think I would have taken for myself.
I must go down. So,
yeah, I need to.
You want your man without a correction, I'm doing it wrong.
Because in academia we don't give the things, we give knowledge.
Very well. Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
That's why I was saying she wants me to be corrected. So, how are we going to? Room 115, 5th floor, psychology department.
Yeah, why not? To connect with colleagues.